Alright, I wanted to make a video to help you guys review for your tests that are going to happen towards the end of this semester. We already took a test on biochemistry. So this video is going to review the 4 macromolecules. So I'm going to start out by cutting this into 4. You may remember us doing this. Okay, so our 4 macromolecules. The first macromolecule is a carbohydrate. All right, and remember, macromolecules, macro just means big. So these are our big or large molecules. So carbohydrate is our first big or large molecules. Lipid, this is our second macromolecule. All right, then we have proteins. And then finally, nucleic acids. All right, so we have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. These are the 4 macromolecules. 4 macromolecules. All right, now each of these macromolecules macro is large. Each of these macromolecules or large molecules are made up of smaller units called a monomer. Monomer, so mono is 1. So the monomer, means part. Monomer is just the one part. So for example, this is the monomer. And when we put a whole bunch of monomers together, a whole bunch of the one parts together, and I'm not going to shade it in just because of time, when we put a bunch of them together, we get a polymer. So poly means many, so this just means many parts. So monomer is just the one, and then many parts. All right, let me just shade it in so we don't get confused. So each macromolecule is made up of monomers that build polymers, with the exceptions of lipids, but we're going to come back to those. But the other 3, okay, carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, are all made up of a monomer-polymer relationship. So carbohydrates, their monomer, the monomer for a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. All right, and remember, mono means 1, and saccharide just means sugar. So carbohydrates, they're just sugars. All right, so monosaccharide is going to look like this. Okay, it's a carbon chain. All right, that is a monosaccharide. The monomer for a protein is called an amino acid. That's just my dog who wants to go outside, crying in the background. He'll be okay though. So amino acids, they have a lot of letters in them, but the most important thing that we need to remember is that they have an R group. So you may see all these random letters, but what I'm just going to draw, I'm going to just draw one circle. But we know that if we see an R, it's going to be an amino acid, because that R group is what's really important here. All right, and then last, we get a nucleic acids. So nucleic acids, their monomers are nucleotides, and they have a large monomer because they're made up of 3 parts. So kind of have this house looking thing, all right, our base, and then our phosphate. So this is a sugar, a phosphate, and a base. And we're going to go into more details about that later. But this whole thing together is a nucleic acid. Copper. Sorry about that. Okay. when we put these monomers together, we get a polymer, or our big molecule. So a carbohydrate is our big molecule. So if I have 2 of these, this is going to be a disaccharide. If I have 3 or more, it's a polysaccharide. Okay. All right, so once again, this is the monomer. An amino acid is the monomer, but what a protein looks like, right, a carbohydrate really looks like this. A protein, you know, it's going to have a bunch of these. Okay, and then with nucleic acids, it's going to be a whole bunch of these linked together, but we link them up and down. All right, so we're just going to leave that like that for now. Okay, and they'll link a bunch of these down. Okay. Now, a lipid, on the other hand, it's not made up of a unit that's going to repeat. What's going to happen with the lipid is it's made up of a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So I tell my students to just think about like a jellyfish. So here's my glycerol. I'm just going to put a G in there. And then we have our 3 fatty acid tails. Okay. All right, so let's talk about some functions. So carbohydrates. These are used for quick energy. Carbohydrates are used for quick energy. They're also used for structure. For example, the outside of a plant, so the cell wall. Oh, we just talked about cell walls in my last video. This cell wall, this piece right here, is actually made up of a carbohydrate called cellulose. So I'll just put that in parentheses, so like cellulose. And it just gives structure. So most of the time, it's going to be quick energy though. Okay, lipids. Lipids can be used for insulation. And that just means to keep warm. So you can think about polar bears. Oh, another name for lipids is fat. Forgot to say that. So lipids are fat. And I always ask the question, have you ever seen a skinny polar bear? And the answer is no, because polar bears need that fat. They need those lipids on them to keep them warm. So fat basically keeps you warm. Okay, it's definitely needed. The other thing that fats do is give you long-term energy. So the reason, if you think about it, not polar bears, but any other bear, you know, they eat a whole bunch and then they can sleep, they can go hibernate. That's because all that food was stored as fat on them, and it's going to give them that long-term energy. All right, proteins. Proteins have so many functions. So an example of proteins are enzymes. And enzymes are catalysts. I'll do another whole section on catalysts, but they speed up chemical reactions. They are used to fight disease. They are, so your white blood cells are proteins or and the antibodies. Just know that it's fight disease. Okay, and then nucleic acids. They do a lot of other jobs, but these are probably the most important. Nucleic acids. So these are things like DNA and RNA. And I'll just write that over here. DNA and RNA. And nucleic acids, they only have one job, and that's to store and transmit genetic info. Okay, they are going to store and transmit genetic info. Alrighty. That's a very, very brief, quick overview of the 4 macromolecules. Oh, the last thing I do want to include. So we said nucleic acids. Those are like DNA and RNA. Lipids. This could be like fat, oil, waxes, anything like that. Proteins. So proteins. I'm going to put it on the side. Let's scoot this over a little bit. So proteins, right? We said enzymes is one example. There's protein in your hair, your fingernails. I'll just say nails. If you're trying to eat a good source of protein, eggs, meat, beans. Those are all really good sources of proteins. And then carbohydrates, remember, these give us quick energy. So the best way to think of examples for carbohydrates is to think about how would you get a kid really hyper? What kind of foods could you give them to give them quick energy? So that could be things like candy, sugar, cake, any kind of soda, anything just has a lot of sugar in it is a carbohydrate. It's gonna give you quick energy. Also pasta, and then veggies. So fruits and veggies. These actually go in that carbohydrate section as well. Okay, and now we are done with our brief overview of the 4 macromolecules.